Okay. Thank you, Kelsey. We call Mr. Quintero from TPPF.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is James Quintero. I'm a policy director at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I want to thank you for taking up these charges today because I think this is one of the most important issues facing Texans everywhere as they deal with a raging cost of living crisis. I want to begin by commending the legislature on the passage of last session's historic tax relief package. It meant a lot to a lot of people, and I want to see if I can put a punctuation on that remark. I borrowed from another member's estimate of the impact of that particular measure on the average homeowner. If you look at page 1 and 2, what you'll find is that for a non-elderly homesteader with a home valued at $331,000, the net effect of this package was to provide $1,266 in tax relief beginning in year 1. In year 2, that increased slightly to $1,312. Now, of course, the legislature, I think, prudently added a little bit of a sweetener for the elderly and the disabled. So for that demographic, in year 1, they actually were supposed to enjoy $1,436 in annual tax savings, and in year 2, $1,482. Now, one of the unfortunate things that I've noticed over the last year and a half is that the legislature's intent has been frustrated by opportunistic local governments. And what I mean is that what we're experiencing right now is an environment of elevated tax rate setting decisions, a lot of tax increase elections, and an enormous volume of public debt. And I want to walk you through those three things in particular very quickly to show you how the estimates that we just walked through have been eroded by local decision making. So when you look at the elevated tax rate environment, what I did is I worked through public notices, budgets, and some other source material to look at how an individual in Houston, San Antonio, Austin, and Fort Worth was affected over the last 2 years. And as you'll notice, in year 1, for most individuals, they actually did see a modest level of tax decrease as it relates to their cities, counties, and school districts. Now, of course, most of that tax relief manifests at the school district level. In year 2, we see a rather large rebound in the level of taxes that most people absorb. Now, one thing to note about all of these estimates is that they exclude special purpose districts, which, as we heard from the Texas Controller, are a large and growing portion of our governmental entities. So this is only a partial representation of what I think the individual is experiencing in some of your major metropolitan areas. Now, in addition to this ordinary tax rate setting environment, we also have lots of activity as it relates to voter approval tax rate elections and tax ratification elections. My team and I have been able to track about 12.5 different VADERs and TREs around the state. I'm pretty sure there's some more out there that we have not yet tracked. But as you'll see from the list, they are fairly well spread all throughout the state. I have to wonder if, given the current environment, that some of these local officials don't think it opportune to ask taxpayers to bear just a little bit more, knowing that the previous legislature lowered taxes and that the next legislature will likely lower taxes. Now, just to give you a sense of things, we have a VADER in Austin ISD. And if this VADER is successful in November 2024, the average person's tax bill will increase by $412 annually in perpetuity. That is a massive tax increase that we're asking our taxpayers to absorb. And it comes at a time when school districts' coffers are flush with cash. Now, moving forward, looking at the public debt environment, I collect data annually from the BRB. We're coming up on the next round. I hope to have some fiscal year 2024 data in November. But what I have right now is fiscal year 2023 data, which shows that local debt service outstanding among all governmental entities reached $461 billion in that year. If you break that down on a per capita basis, you're looking at a local debt burden of $15,500 owed for every man, woman, and child in this state. Now, the largest portion of that total debt figure is on account of school districts. School districts represent about 40% of the overall share. And it's not just that we owe that much, but it's also that we're adding tons of new debt every election cycle. So one of the things that I get to do at the foundation is I get to go spelunking through all of the various voter information documents that are posted by governmental entities. And what I've started to do is go through these vids and collect the principal and the interest amount for each proposition so that I know in total how much is being asked of our voters. And so in May of this year, we had almost 325 bond propositions pitched to voters. Yes, I went through 325 vids to collect data that shows governmental entities asked for $38.8 billion in new debt in May 2024 alone, and voters signed off on $33 billion of that debt. If you go back one election cycle, which again is not captured in that FY 2023 number, if you go back to November 2023, I did it again. I looked at 307 propositions which asked voters to consider $64.7 billion in new government debt, 42.8 of which was approved. We are adding lots and lots and lots of new debt every cycle, and it is eroding what we have done at the state level. Now, you may be asking, well, why are we adding all of this new debt? Well, I have one suggestion, and that is we are allowing our school districts, who are, again, the most indebted governmental type, to push M&O expenses onto the INS side of the ledger. And as evidence of that, on, I believe this is page 6 here, we have a quote from the Round Rock ISD superintendent, who in a recent community impact article talking about a $998 million bond package, says that if we have a leaky roof at McNeil High School, or if we have a chiller at one of our campuses that breaks down and we have to replace it, we have to tap into our maintenance and operations budget, which is very tight. Well, let me suggest this. If you have a leaky roof or you have an HVAC unit that needs service, that is a perfect opportunity to use your maintenance and operations budget to pay for that. That is not prudent to put that on the INS side of the ledger. So what do we do about all of these things? Well, I've got a list of about 20 different suggestions about how you tighten up the system, but I want to begin by encouraging the body to consider going down the path of continued rate compression. And I think this is valuable for a couple of different reasons. One, it puts the surplus to use in a responsible way. We don't grow government in this fashion. Two, it puts us on the path to eliminating Robin Hood, which is something that I know nobody likes. And number three, it provides immediate tax relief. Now, it is our goal at the foundation to continue urging the legislature down the path until we get to the spot where there is no more school district M&O tax. I think that is prudent. And ultimately, I hope this body will consider a conversation about what to do about the property tax as a whole. But for right now, I hope we stay laser focused on eliminating school tax alone. So now, again, we have a lot of problems at the local level, and what has become very evident to me is we shouldn't just focus on relief. We have to do tax reform too. And of these 20 different items, I think the most valuable one, and the one that I would encourage you to consider the most, is to extend a local tax and expenditure limit down to our cities, counties, and even school districts, right? And I'm not even asking for anything ambitious. I'm simply urging the body to consider extending what you already observe down to the local level, right? If it's good for the state, then it ought to be good for our cities, counties, and school districts too. Now, in addition to that, I would also urge the body to consider some ballot box transparency. And what I mean is, right now, the legislature requires school districts to put "this is a property tax increase" on every bond proposition. School districts have gotten quite clever and seem to have figured out ways to game this system. And what I mean is that if you look at the statute, the language is in all capital letters. Well, they've started to put the whole bond proposition in all capital letters. And not only that, they've sandwiched that statement at the bottom in between English and Spanish. So what I would ask the body, let's accentuate the language just a little bit. Make it red, bold it, underline it, put it at the top. Do something so that voters understand that what they're participating in could lead to a tax increase. I would also ask the body to extend that to all political subdivision types, and maybe even go so far as to add a cost element to the proposition, right? If we're going to ask voters to approve a $1 billion bond, there ought to be a little box at the top that says, hey, if you approve this measure, that your taxes could potentially go up by X number of dollars annually. I think it only makes sense to have a price tag on each of these propositions. The last thing that I'll urge the body to consider, and I listened to Commissioner Marath's comments about school districts having fund balances totaling $24 billion, and my mouth just about hit the floor. So I have to urge the body to institute some common sense requirements so that school districts aren't hoarding excess monies, and instead maybe even encourage or require them to return those monies back to taxpayers on their own. If the legislature can do compression, then there's no reason that school districts can't do compression too, using excess fund balance money. So with that, I thank you for your time and for all of your good work. I look forward to being a resource if I can. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Members, any questions for Mr. Quintero? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.